It's always that delay. There you go, Madison. Recording is started.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. I am excited to be sharing with you all today, and you'll actually hear me very little this afternoon because I have three great co-presenters. So I wanted to do some introductions first. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Madison Chapman. I'm the lead clinical psychologist for CMH for Central Michigan. And I have a lot of different roles at the agency. Primarily, I work with providers and consumers and teams to do behavioral consultation and support teams when the individual has some type of challenging behavior, and we are trying to figure out some more effective ways to support that person. And sometimes that results in developing a behavior treatment plan. So I also work very closely with Behavior Treatment Committee at CMH. So we have a few other co-presenters, like I said, so could each of you introduce yourselves?
I can go first. My name is Katie McGillis, and I'm a psychology intern at CMHCM. Similar to Madison, I have a lot of roles. I do a lot of things to provide behavioral supports. I think my favorite is I do monthly team meetings with some AFCs in the region, and I love that as an opportunity to talk about behavioral concerns before they become a big problem. So it's good to meet everybody.
I can go next. My name's Bonnie, and I am a psychology practicum student at Community Mental Health this year. I am getting my PhD in clinical psychology at Central. So I will be with CMH until August. So I've been enjoying my time here. So thanks for having me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley. I am the other CMHCM psychology practicum student. I'm in my final year of my PhD program, and it's exciting to be here with you all. This is my second training I've done with Provider Network, so excited to see you all.
Thanks, everybody. And if you have had the opportunity to join the other trainings, we really want this to be a practical resource for all of you. We hope you leave this session with some new tools, maybe some more information about data collection. Data collection isn't new to any of you, I am sure, but we really want to provide some more resources to equip you in your roles with these ancillary trainings. So some of the things that we'll be talking about today with data collection are how can data collection be useful? We'll share some different types of data collection tools, and then talk about interpretation and go through an example together. And also, if you have joined us before, you probably know that we like to be a little interactive with these trainings. So there will be some opportunities to share your thoughts or input through the chat, or you're always welcome to unmute yourself and share a question. We will have some time at the end for overall questions as well. But I'm going to get our first activity set up here, and we want you to take a moment to think about how you feel about data collection. And I have some choices for you here. So out of these gifts, you should see a poll come up, and I'd like you to think about, of these four options, how do you feel about data collection? And then we should be able to see the results here as well. I see some of you responding so far. Starting to see a pattern there. So it looks like we have a couple that are in the lead. Number 1 and number 2 are the highest ranked so far. So I'm super excited some kind of frustrated, irritated, I'd say, is number 2. And some in all of the categories, which is what we were kind of expecting here. So, I guess if I click away from it, it stops moving. So we recognize that you probably all have a lot of different experiences with data collection, might be thrilled about data collection, might be a number 1, but you probably also have some challenges with data collection. I think we all do. So that's a lot of the things that we want to talk about this afternoon. I also wanted to share that you all collect lots of data already. Sometimes it probably feels like behavioral data is foreign and unfamiliar, but I pulled some examples from daily care logs and other progress note templates that many of you probably use. And I just wanted to point out that you're already documenting a lot of different behaviors every shift, or you're supporting staff who document a lot of behaviors. So when we're collecting behavioral data, it's not all that different from this kind of data collection, but we do recognize that there are some differences. And that's why we wanted to provide more guidance and support today. So a little more detail about what we'll be covering. We'll talk about when should behavioral data be collected. That's a question we often get. What kinds of data collection methods can be used? We'll go through several examples and talk about what different situations that type of data collection method would be helpful and most useful for. We'll also talk about how behavioral data is used by CMH and other agencies. We get that question pretty often as well, who's looking at this? And we want you to know the ways that we're using it and how it's helping multiple people in their roles. And then, like I said, we'll go through an example together. Just like with the other trainings, you all will have access to these slides afterward, and we'll also be sharing some templates for behavioral data collection forms that we share with you today. So you'll have that as a resource. And on that note, Ashley will take it over.
So in thinking about why we ask for data collection, there are really 3 things that we're thinking about when we ask for that. And that includes when a consumer has a significant change in behavior from baseline, either a real increase in maybe a challenging behavior, or it could even be a decrease in regular activities, like a decrease in taking care of themselves. So it can be an increase or a decrease. We also ask for data collection when new supports are being considered, and even after implementation of supports, when those supports are being monitored. And our goals at CMHCM, and specifically with Behavior Services team, is to work alongside you to gather more information on a consistent basis. So we don't have it just on a monthly basis, but really on a maybe even daily or weekly basis, or hourly sometimes. Our second goal is to share information with the whole team, you guys, us, sometimes even the consumer, medical providers, etc., to make sure everybody's on the same page. And data collection is so helpful because it informs decisions about care across all of those entities. So the great thing though is that it's a back and forth team. We have our part, but you have your part too. And so if the data collection plan isn't working, it would be a beautiful time to let us know so that we can tweak it. So that's one of our goals too, is to tweak the data collection plan itself through data collection, if that makes sense. But before we really get into the nitty-gritty of what data collection is, it's best to have a good idea, a really foundational idea about what the target behavior is that we're going to track. And if you have logged on some of the trainings previously, we've discussed in detail behaviors and what the function of behaviors that might mean. And if you haven't seen it, please go watch those videos. But to review it again briefly, it's important to define the target behavior in consistent terms that is used consistently across all staff and all providers. It's important to generate examples and non-examples so that people aren't unintentionally including things that actually aren't the target behavior. And then again, it's important to work with all staff, working with the consumer so that everyone's on the same page about what that target behavior is. Now, we all know that many of our consumers have more than one target behavior, which can make it challenging for data collection. So to make it even simpler, it's important that maybe there's only 2 to maybe 3 target behaviors that are being tracked at one time, because it can get overwhelming if there's 5 or 6, right? And in that way, when you pick 2 or 3, you can focus on the ones that are the most severe, causing the most significant harm or most safety risk. And then you can target behaviors after that once those have decreased a little bit. Okay, so let's work together. I have 2 examples of target behaviors that are really vague. So let's look at yelling first. Put a better definition of yelling in the chat. It can be based on a consumer that you work with or based on a better definition that you have. Refraining from using protected health information, of course. What would be a better definition for yelling? Raising voice, I like that, Holly, because you're thinking about a baseline voice, so raising a voice. I'm looking for one more. Awesome, Kaylee. So raising a voice to get staff's attention. I love that. So it's even more specific. It's got a specific function too. And that makes it very much easier for staff to consistently track what that looks like, because they're looking for a raised voice in a specific context. Let's move on to being inappropriate, and let's think about it, maybe sexual behavior. So if I just wrote down being inappropriate as a target behavior, what would be a better definition of a target behavior about sexual inappropriateness?
Using sexual language.
Awesome. I love that, Tanya. Using sexual language. So we're looking specifically if we have a consumer who uses language around sexual topics. Great. Let's get one more. And put it in the chat too. Kaylee, yes, attempting to hug or kiss a housemate, making physical contact with others without permission, and then you gave some examples too. These are fantastic. Thank you for participating, and it's helpful to see where all of our providers are at in terms of definitions. These are great. I really appreciate the examples in the definition that was provided. So I have on the next slide some example definitions based on different consumers I've worked with over the last year. So yelling might be verbal threats of harm towards staff and others. We're specifically targeting not just yelling, but when a consumer is making verbal threats. And then for being inappropriate, an example definition could be something like sexual touching or acts in public spaces or in front of staff and others if there's masturbation, for example, or other sexual acts. Thanks for participating. So moving on to what the types of behavioral data that we might track. Let's first start with baseline behavioral data. And the point of baseline behavioral data is to get a good idea of the frequency, the context, and other things related to the behavior in a consumer's natural state before we start implementing some behavior strategies or interventions. Some questions we might be asking during baseline behavioral data collection is, how often is the behavior occurring when nobody does anything about it? Is it actually an ongoing pattern? And what kind of context does the behavior occur in? What might the function be? What's the consumer trying to stop or get access to because of the behavior? When collecting baseline behavioral data, it's really as long as necessary to see a reliable pattern, because we want the interventions to address that pattern in the behavior. And sometimes that takes up to 2 to 3 months. So, and that again is just to see that baseline behavior pattern so that our interventions can really address where those patterns are. In contrast to baseline data, we use monitoring data to look at when we implement, after we implement those strategies. So this in data for monitoring will measure target behaviors, new skills being learned by the consumer, actual use of intervention strategies by staff, and looking at before and after changes in interventions are proposed. So again, some questions that might be asked would be, is the behavior actually changing as a result of the interventions? Are the interventions that we're requesting staff to use actually being implemented correctly? Is the consumer developing new skills to replace their target behaviors? Are some of the restrictive and intrusive interventions that were approved by Behavior Treatment Committee actually needed still? And we actually look at fading too. Is the behavior decreasing? Are appropriate behaviors increasing? And do the interventions actually need to be faded? For data for monitoring, it's similar to baseline that we're going to collect data for as long as is necessary to monitor the interventions that we're proposing. So that means, as long as the intrusive or restrictive interventions are in place, data collection needs to take place so we know how the interventions are matching the behavior and reducing it, and as long as the data collection informs treatment. So both of these types of data collection are very important for not just us, but also for you to see how the interventions are working.
So I guess the next kind of phase of our presentation is kind of talking about what are some struggles that you or your staff have had when collecting behavioral data. It can be challenging at times. Of course, we're not going to put any client specific information, but what are some instances that data collection was just difficult? And I will note that my chat is a little slow. It likes to update a little delayed. So if you put a message in there, it might take a second.
My chat's not working, but it is a time constraint.
Time. Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah, taking data in the moment or consistently taking data. That is all. Yeah, that is a challenge. You get busy doing things with supporting consumers, and then next thing you know, oh, I'm supposed to be taking behavioral data. Yeah. Any other ones? Any other challenges that you come into or your staff come into?
Bonnie shared one that we hear quite often is it's hard to track behaviors that are happening really, really frequently.
Yeah. So for behaviors that we have happening like really often throughout the day, how can we make sure that we track that accurately? Yeah, for sure. So let's see, let's talk about data. Let's talk about how we can use this data. So the first one I want to talk about is frequency data. So you know, how often does it occur? It just provides us an accurate rate of, let's see. Oh, I got another one here. You know, misunderstanding target behaviors. Yep. Over or under collecting data. Yeah, those are definite things that happen too. And those are all challenges that I've had. You know, in the past, I've had to develop and run behavior plans and collect data myself. And that is a challenge. Those things do come up. So frequency data tracks how often target behaviors occur, and they kind of just give us an idea. Is this something that happens, you know, a couple times a day, a couple times a week, or is it more frequent? This data is helpful in comparing just over time how often. So if when we track sequential months, we can see if within, you know, a 3 or 4 month span, do behaviors increase or decrease, or do they stay kind of the same? Um, and then you can help see like if there's new behavioral trends emerging, you know, is there more verbal aggression happening as we get closer to maybe some holidays, or, you know, are they changed medication, you know, so it helps to assess the effectiveness of some supports, you know, is the medication correlating at all any changes to their behaviors after they had a change in medication. So that's just an example. On the other side here, I have an example of a frequency chart that I would put in a behavior plan to kind of show behaviors over time. And as we can see for this person, they have pretty high rates of physical aggression. In a month, they can go, you know, 53 we have in March, you know, 152 in February. So it seems like a really high rate of behavior for this physical aggression. But if we actually look at the previous year for this consumer, we can see that rate of aggression was even higher. So tracking over time and tracking consistently can be really helpful from where, you know, if we just start tracking and see, wow, this person had 76 instances of physical aggression. But compared to last year, that time that they had 217. So even though we're still struggling, we're still trying to help this consumer, it helps us give like a check-in of like what we're doing is working, or it gives us an idea of maybe things aren't going well. It kind of gives us that bigger picture over time where we might not otherwise have seen that. You know, when do we take frequency data? It's to track ongoing target behaviors. You know, it's very important as part of the BTC process to show that they continue to engage in the behaviors that warrant the potentially restrictive or intrusive strategies. But we can track behaviors for frequency data, like frequency data, before there's even a BTP in place. So, you know, you notice that one of your consumers is getting more agitated, or they're engaging in a behavior that's really concerning. It's not against their rights to go ahead and just start taking data, then start tracking how often does that occur in a day or in a week. That way you have an idea, is this kind of what we expect for this person, or is this above and beyond what is normal? So here's an example of frequency data. So you have for every day, of course, this is for a home that has 3 shifts. If you have 2 shifts or different ways that you go about your shifts, it could look different. But what we have for each shift and each day of the month for physical aggression, we're tracking how often that occurs. So we're tracking every time. And if there's nothing that happens, we put a 0. That way it shows that the strategies that we used helped us not have any physical aggression. And at the end of the month, you see that there's a shift total. So there's 141 or 177 total, but we have 41 for the first shift, 18 for the second shift, and 118 for the third shift. So something else that you can see especially when you break down data this way, you can see, wow, this person really struggles on that third shift. I'm wondering what's happening. Is it difficult for them to be you know, in their room at night? Is there other factors happening on third shift? It kind of gives us a heads up, you know, how things are going in that home. Um, and so if you look at what a less helpful version of a frequency data, you know, there's a lot of gaps. You know, on the one hand, I see this and maybe there are no behaviors on those gaps. Maybe they're doing really well, but when there's nothing in place there, there's not a 0 there. It's kind of hard to tell, well, was it something where we got busy and something sidetracked us and we weren't able to track that day, or was it a 0 for that day? So it just shows you, it kind of limits the amount that we can kind of understand the data and understand behaviors. Transitioning to ABC data, I think ABC data is a little bit more complex just because this is more time consuming. You are writing out a bit more, but let's talk about why. What is it about? ABC data is to help us paint a picture of the behavior. You know, I wish I could be on fly on the wall and I wish I could spend time in every home, but that's just not possible. And so when we take down detailed information, we can see who's involved during these times of behavior. What does the behavior look like when they are kind of getting elevated or agitated or engaging in the target behavior? Where and when is this happening? Is it happening on third shift? Is it happening when they're at home, when they're in the community? And then what staff responses currently look like and the efficacy of those responses. So, you know, we know that you and your staff try a lot of strategies to help people. What things have you already tried? That way I don't try to support you by asking you to do the same things you're already doing. And then also kind of getting to check in with you. Okay, these are the things that you're trying. How well are those things going? Where are things succeeding, where they're not? Kind of helps us further drive the supports that we give. So in a nutshell, ABC data answers all of those who, what, where, when, and why questions for us about the behavior. When we use ABC data, it's really helpful when we're trying to learn about new behaviors or something that we're not really quite sure about, or we're not really fully understanding why it's occurring. So we're able to create a baseline of behavior, you know, so and so when they go into the community and they're not able to get something that they want, they can throw a tantrum or yell or you know, cuss at their staff, and then these are the consequences of those things that happen. You know, thinking about what's normal for that person. Identifying and investigating possible target behaviors for tracking. You know, sometimes we get referrals and people are saying we're just struggling. We don't know what's happening here. We don't know why, but we're just struggling. And that can be a way to help us tease apart, you know, what behaviors are the most important to track right now. It provides insight regarding environmental and staff factors, kind of like we talked before. Maybe behaviors happen more when it's chaotic in the home, like during transition times, people getting off work or shift changes. Um, it helps us have hypotheses for why the behavior is happening. It gives us an idea to test to see, is it because they can't get access to something that they want? Is it because the environment is kind of more uh, busy than usual? Um, it helps us to investigate behaviors proactively. So the ABC data is great to use to kind of identify problems before they occur. That way we can start doing some positive supports before it becomes a full behavior plan. And then it also helps us know, once we've established a behavior plan and we know the function of a behavior, it's also helpful to do ABC data later on. That way we can check to see if things have changed. You know, the reason why I like to go work out now is very different than the reason why I wanted to go work out when I was in my early 20s. I want to do it now to feel better and for my health rather than just losing weight. And so kind of like we were talking previously, looking at like an ABC refresher. So the A in ABC stands for antecedent, or just what happens before. What is the thing that happens before the behavior? B is the behavior. So describing what it looked like. They were angry and they threw something across the room, you know, being kind of detailed about what it looked like. And the consequence of that behavior. I know that when I hear consequence, I think of something that like negative or something that is to kind of reduce a behavior, but also just consequences, just what happens. You know, if they you know, yell inside of a store, do we leave the store? Is that the natural consequence of that action? So here's an example of how to use ABC data. So I'll read through it real quick. So you can see at the top, we have the consumer's information that helps us make sure that we have the right data sheet. And then in that kind of grayed out box, we also see for this person, we see their target behavior. So we're tracking physical aggression and property destruction for this person. So in that first box, we just include the date and time, you know, and in this instance, you know, this person had a behavior at around 7 p.m., between 6 and 7 p.m., and it was in August. It was the setting, you know, what was the environment looking like? So it was right after dinner, so everybody was kind of sitting in the living room and the television was on. Directly before the behavior, the thing that happened most immediate before the behavior The consumer was sitting in their preferred chair after dinner and using their smartphone, and then staff were writing notes in the staff office. The behavior that was concerning was the consumer yelled loudly and began to hit the wall nearest to their chair. So reminding them that they are safe in their home, so gave them that verbal reassurance, and then asked if there was anything that the consumer needed. They checked in with the consumer, and at that point, that what happened very after the event, so the consumer calmed down. The consumer stopped hitting the wall, gave the staff a cup, and the staff then verified that they would want something to drink. The consumer indicated they were thirsty. And so this whole, it's a sentence here and there, but what we get is this picture of this person engages in this kind of abrupt, loud behavior, but there was a function to it. They were using that as a communication tool. So here are a couple other examples. It's the same target behaviors, but I'm kind of curious. There's some differences here, and I think it changes how we understand the behavior. Um, these are some examples that I would say are less helpful. They don't really outline a lot about the behavior, so we're getting some information, but it's not very specific. So I wanted to ask real quick, what are some things here that are different and make a difference in how we interpret compared to the previous example?
It's way more vague.
Vague, yeah. And there's not much information on what happened before. Yeah, it kind of limits. It's like we have a little bit of understanding of what that behavior is, but not what happened before. And kind of similar to like Ashley had described a little bit ago, when it's vague, it kind of leaves it up more to interpretation. The setting was normal. For the second example, you see the setting was just normal. I don't know what normal looks like in the home. Normal for a home could be, we have people coming in, going to different programming, MMI, Arnold Center. Yeah, and the previous example was very specific and painted a picture for others to understand. It's not so much that we're trying to punish people and ask them to write all these detailed information. It's more about helping us see what you see. You guys see, yeah, it's difficult to tell the function based on this information. The data, basically the data that we get from you guys is our eyes and ears in the home when we're not able to be there. So this kind of blinds us in a little way, kind of prevents us from being able to see everything. And I did want to mention with ABC data, especially like for high frequency behaviors that happen a whole lot, sometimes we don't catch them every time. Sometimes when we do write them down, we make sure that the ones that we write down, we're able to create a clear, complete picture. And maybe we make sure we track every single instance of the behavior happening in a frequency chart. So just kind of knowing that there is flexibility in how we can use these data. And here's some other examples of ABC checkboxes. So like using that same kind of model, what happened before, during, and after. But these are much more targeted and quicker to use because they are checkboxes. But they are, what's needed before we're able to do these is we have to have more information, kind of like the previous slides. Once we know more about the information or the behaviors, we know kind of those most frequent things that happened before and the most frequent consequences of what happens after. We're able to create some checkboxes that make it quicker for you and your staff to fill out. We're still getting that good detailed information, but this is all based on what we already know these things about this consumer. So we know that this consumer can engage in behaviors if they appear anxious beforehand, so it's possible to get data to be really, really targeted towards your consumer and their behaviors, but we have to have that information beforehand.
Okay, so I am, oh gosh, of course. As soon as I unmute, my dog starts barking. Sorry, everyone. I am going to be wrapping up our training by talking about some of the purposes of data collection and then also running through a brief example of how we might interpret some ABC and frequency data. So first, I wanted to just emphasize what Ashley and Katie had already mentioned, that data collection is a constant part of our process, whether we're learning about baseline behaviors to monitoring the progress of behaviors as different interventions are implemented. And the purposes of that data collection may change as we run through this process. So on top of staff utilizing data collection to record frequencies and monitor target behaviors, data collection also helps us develop hypotheses about the function or purpose of behaviors, as we've all stated prior. Helps us kind of develop and then test different hypotheses on what's causing or triggering behaviors to occur. We also use on our behavior treatment team, we use data collection to write our behavior treatment plans when we provide behavioral consultations for consumers, or when we are providing ongoing monitoring of target behaviors, whether that's through following up with a consultation or a behavior plan. So we are constantly looking at data just to see how our interventions that we're suggesting are impacting behaviors. Case managers may review data too. They report data frequency to the behavior treatment committee, which then leads to decisions being made about restrictive and intrusive interventions. So data collection is an important part of the behavior treatment committee's process as well. And then finally, as Ashley had mentioned previously, medical providers may also look at data, support staff may look at data, referencing data and how behaviors have changed over time to monitor impacts of medications or other interventions meant to either increase or decrease different target behaviors. So now an example of data collection. So just briefly, I didn't give much detail here, but we're going to pretend that we have a consumer. She is 22 years old with autism and has been having more physical aggression and property destruction type behaviors. So we're kind of being called in to do a consult. And in the meantime, support staff are going to be collecting data. The other thing to note too, just so that you guys have this in the back of your mind as we're interpreting the data, is that these behaviors occur both at home and at school. So the consumer does go to school and she lives in an AFC home. So staff have been asked to track baseline data using ABC data tracking sheets. So we are going to look at an example of one of those. So if everyone can just read through this and think about some things that Katie had talked about prior with antecedents and consequences in regards to the behavior of concern. So we see here on Monday, our consumer got home from school with a staff. She was sitting on the couch with her tablet, and the staff had prompted her to complete her daily chore, and then staff began preparing dinner. The target behavior then occurred. The consumer yelled and then threw her tablet at the wall. So that is an example of property destruction, we'll say. And then what happened after that was staff picked up the tablet and redirected the consumer to come help with dinner, and the consumer continued to sit on the couch. Now, Thursday, more target behaviors occurred. So staff and consumer were at home. Consumer was watching TV and staff had prompted her to come get dinner. Consumer then walked into the kitchen and hit another resident, and then staff redirected consumer to her bedroom to engage in a different type of task, like listening to music or something like that, and she complied. So if we're trying to interpret this or come up with some potential hypotheses for the function of this target behavior, these target behaviors. What are some patterns to some of the antecedents that we see in this ABC data sheet? And this could be situations or settings or other events that may have prompted a target behavior for this consumer.
Consumers being asked to do something.
Yep. Consumers being asked to complete an undesirable task for them in that moment. And another pattern too, we notice is in the consequences that when the consumer was redirected to the task that they were initially asked to do, they did not comply. Whereas when they were asked to do something different, they did comply. So that's another interpretation we may find. Any other details, time of day, as maybe a little bit of a hint there. Oh, any other patterns we may notice? Consumer appeared to be relaxing. Yep. And then staff asked her to complete a non-preferred task. Yep. That is a great summary of an antecedent. Client is engaged in a different activity when prompted to do something different. So yeah, in this case, this consumer is on their tablet or on their phone and then being asked to do something. We may also notice that these behaviors, and I know it's hard to kind of come up with a pattern of only two instances of data tracking, but we could maybe assume that these behaviors are more likely to occur when the consumer gets home from school, since they happen later in the afternoon. Yep. Perfect. Consumer has just gotten home from school when demand was placed. Exactly. So those are some potential hypotheses. Now we're going to kind of go through and play out this example a little bit further. So let's say staff had been tracking that ABC data for a month in April. So April is our baseline month. And now we've just asked staff to document the frequency of behavior. So we've compiled those into a total for, what is this, 8 months. So these are the numbers for physical aggression and property destruction from April to November. So when looking at this table, what kinds of patterns are we seeing with the amount of target behaviors occurring and when they occur?
Big increase in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. High frequency in summer, variable in non-summer months, but yeah, more frequent in the summer. And part of that could be, as Holly had said, because they're not in school anymore. There's a lack of structure, maybe. There could be some other change that we're not necessarily aware of that could happen in the summer that may impact that increase in behaviors. So we can see that there's benefit too in, although it feels like a really long time, 8 months is a long time to be keeping track of data, but we can see the benefit of looking at it over a longer period of time to see what are some maybe more longer term patterns here. So we can see that there may be a more increase in target behaviors in the summer. Now looking at the next slide here, now we're going to kind of, this is less, I have less questions here, but more kind of thinking about the importance of baseline data, as Katie was mentioning too, and comparing our current data to baseline data. So if we were to play this example out for an additional 3 months from December to February, staff are continuing to track data. we can maybe assume that our hypothesis was correct, that the target behaviors were more likely to occur in the summer since they are on the decline in the fall. And if we look at numbers from December to February, much lower than our initial baseline in April, at least for physical aggression. So important too to kind of look back, not only just looking at, like we did, the differences in a chunk of months compared to another chunk of months, but also looking at what's the data looking like now versus what did it look like in April when we started collecting baseline. And we may see some more persistent declines in target behaviors in the later months of this year. So that's just kind of a brief example of running through how we may interpret different types of data. I wanted to end with a bit of a discussion question, and feel free to continue unmuting or putting your answer in the chat. But I wanted to know, we talked about the challenges earlier with data collection. Now I wanted to end on a positive note and talk about the successes with data collection. So what do you find valuable or important about collecting behavioral data from your own perspective? And maybe too, what successes have you had with data collection that you've seen? And I know this one's a tough one, so I have an easier follow-up question. If you would prefer, you can also share a GIF that expresses how you feel about data collection now compared to at the beginning. Oh, we have one response here. So I like having data when implementing skill acquisition programs. Yep, such as functional communication training. It is a great way to see if your intervention is effective. That's a great example. Thank you. Yeah, it can be really valuable when we see increases in replacement behaviors or, positive behaviors. It can be very fulfilling. Any other positive experiences or positive thoughts about data collection?
I gotta say, I was looking forward to seeing what other gifts people had, but maybe that's just that I picked the 4 best ones at the beginning that captured it all.
I'm gonna go try to find a GIF right now and put it in the chat.
Great. Feel free to anybody else still, if you're searching for what's the perfect GIF to show how you are thinking about data. I love that reality. We also have some time for questions, like I said, and at the beginning, we want this to be very practical and useful for you. And as I'm thinking about everything that we were trying to cover today, I think that ultimately with behavioral data, we're trying to have a way that we can help you help consumers more effectively. If we don't have that information, we don't know how to help, and we might even be attempting to help in ways that are ineffective. And that's really disappointing to me. I don't want to be providing suggestions that you've already tried and didn't work, and we just don't know it yet. And like others have talked about, a lot of people are using this information. So we want prescribers to have behavioral data so that they can adjust medication regimens in a really effective way and support consumers and help you support them. So we covered a lot of different topics, but we do have some time for questions. What are your continued questions or follow-ups, things that you'd like to know a little bit more about related to data collection.
We talked about earlier about frequency when when it is going over and over and over again. Do you guys have a suggestion for how to keep track of that better?
Yeah, I think starting at the very beginning and having such a clear target behavior definition is helpful. So figuring out how to notice when the behavior is starting and ending is really important. If that's not clear, then we might be tracking more instances of the behavior than are actually happening. Maybe it's one long behavior that we tracked as maybe 5 or 6 times, and that can lead to inconsistencies between staff as well. Maybe some staff look at one scenario and they see 3 target behaviors happen during that time, and another staff might view it as one instance of the target behavior where multiple things happened during that period of time. So having that clear target behavior definition, just like changing the data collection plan, sometimes we tweak target behavior definitions too. Maybe we can add to them and make it clearer for everybody. And then some behaviors where it is multiple instances of that behavior, I think figuring out how to make it as convenient as possible to track that behavior. If you're using a data sheet that's in a binder in the upper cabinet in the kitchen, it's probably going to be inconvenient to go up and add a tally mark each time the behavior happens. But if you have maybe a notebook that is within arm's reach while you're providing support to the consumer, where you can have some tallies that you're tracking throughout the day, and then transfer that total number of tallies to the frequency chart, that can be helpful too. I think any way that you remove barriers that make it inconvenient to track that data, because staff have a lot of responsibilities during their shift. So we completely recognize that this might not be highest on your priority list because you have lots and lots of priorities. So I think doing that, defining the behavior more specifically and making it as convenient as possible to track that frequency. What other questions do people have? All right, well, like I said, we will be sharing these slides and some templates for data collection too. We are always here as a resource at CMH, so you can reach out to us anytime if you'd like some support with developing data collection plans. Case holders at CMH are also trained in developing data collection plans, and they're probably sending you lots of data sheets already for many different things to track for the consumers you're working with and tracking those PCP goals, so they can be a great resource. And like I said, you'll also have those templates as well. So you are absolutely welcome to begin data collection when you are starting to see that, hey, here's a new concerning behavior. We're not quite sure why it's happening. Or, there's a change here. We're trying some new interventions. We want to track the frequency of the behavior and see if it's decreasing after we try this new intervention. You are absolutely welcome to implement a data collection plan, even if the consumer doesn't have a behavior treatment plan. Maybe you're not working with the behavior services team for consultation. You can still use that resource. We don't have to give you permission to do that. You can move forward, but we're always here to help. So thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thanks, Madison. Thanks, Katie, Bonnie, and Ashley for presenting. And thank you all for participating. not only by showing up today, but with the chat and taking yourself off of mute. So like Madison said, we will have all of the slides, all of those other documents posted along with a recording of the training. As soon as that's posted, I will get something sent out via Constant Contact so you guys can easily access that. And then just a reminder, our next training is on Wednesday, June 28th. Same time, same place, 1 p.m. And that training is going to be on emergency physical intervention and critical incidents. So both Karen Brzett and Jane Gilmore will be presenting for our June training. So we hope to see you all then. And thank you again very much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.